Reacher is back this week with the 5th episode of Season 3, and it's safe to say that following last week's episode that was heavily focused on a flashback on how Reacher was connected to Xavier Quinn and the reason for his deep-rooted hatred, this one was all about providing the action, progressing the story forward and leaving us on a massive cliffhanger again, just like the last episode did. With us seeing several deaths, Reacher's cover almost being blown and him actually realizing that Paulie might be a threat to him after taking the punch. Let's dive into the episode and break down all that there was to take away from it. Here is Reacher Season 3 Episode 5 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The ending explained. When it came to the ending of this episode, we saw that Reacher was summoned to meet with Julius McCabe, who he obviously knows as Francis Xavier Quinn, the very person that he thought he killed several years ago after he found out that Quinn killed Dominique Cole. All throughout this episode, it felt like the key theme was centered around the line that was spoken, saving the life of a good person is a pretty low bar for praise. Something that both Reacher and Duffy said to one another when they helped each other out on different occasions. However, both of them were unable to save two people that were on the side of good and were working against bringing down McCabe, meaning that there was a sense of guilt that then lied within them. One was Stephen Elliott, the agent that always felt like his negligence and inexperience was going to land him in trouble. He ended up being killed by the guard. And there was also the French maid Annette. She was a person that Reacher had grown close to over the course of his time in Beck's home, even sticking up to her when McCabe's muscle was speaking to her disrespectfully. We saw that Reacher wasn't the only person that was undercover inside of Beck's home. Annette was actually undercover and was working for the ATF, which is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms. Most likely investigating to find out if McCabe's operation was dealing with the transportation of any of those goods specifically. Annette was ultimately caught because when the bodyguard escaped the cabin and was heading back to Beck's house in order to spill the information that Reacher was working with the DEA and that he was undercover, Duffy shut down the power in the area as a distraction so Reacher could get the bodyguard, but it ultimately led McCabe to do a complete search of the house to see if there was a rat amongst them. We were led to believe that they were going to find Duffy's badge that Reacher found on the floor of the warehouse that he negligently kept in his pillowcase. But instead, they found that Annette clearly didn't have a shoe like Reacher where the phone could be hidden in the heel, and she was relaying information back to her superiors through messages every few days. This led Paulie to whack her, like he whacked Reacher, and she was ultimately killed by the impact, something which meant that Reacher then had to dispose of her body in nature's toilet as was described by Beck's henchman. This death was one that impacted Reacher because she was somebody who he had a connection with, was a good person and didn't deserve to die. Him receiving the pie from her with a note that said thank you just added that extra layer of human connection there, and I think when he saw her, it broke him a little bit. Hence why he still had her blood on his hands and he made sure that he laid her to rest with her head facing upright before it was covered, so there was at least some dignity and respect that he could at least try and show her. As well as mourning her, I also feel like he saw himself in that situation. He saw what McCabe, Beck, and Paulie do to feds if they're found to be undercover. They're eliminated within minutes, which in this instance is instantly. And whilst I don't think he feared it, I think it was more of a realization that he was always only a few steps away from being killed. With him being summoned to meet with McCabe, aka Quinn at the end of the episode, it was a risk for him because he could have been recognized, but as we heard, Quinn did suffer from amnesia after the fall and the shot, so he might not recognize Reacher at all. But it does still seem like Reacher still has that thirst for Quinn's blood after what he did to his close friend Cole. We didn't see the both of them meet, but with Reacher going for his gun, it seems like he might well go for Quinn if he gets the opportunity to. Something which would be foolish in front of all of his men, so I don't think he actually will. One main revelation that we did get in this episode though was that the operation is centered around firearms and the supplying of them to criminals. We know that McCabe supplies them to dealers, but there's a large shipment that he's working on. We didn't find out who it was that was the buyer, but I wonder with him previously being involved in selling information to hostile territories and him being connected to the military, could it be an organization in a hostile nation? It could well be. What's happened to Theresa? We saw that there was a focus on Duffy still feeling responsible for Theresa going missing, and the odds being on the side of her being dead. However, we saw that Duffy told the story of a young boy that went missing and months later turned back up. So she was holding on to any glimmer of hope that she could possibly find. I would say though, I'm probably on the side of Reacher and Villy with their thought process in thinking that she'd most likely be killed if her cover was blown. These are people that don't think twice about killing somebody, especially if they're working with the authorities. However, there were signs of her still being alive, let's remember that. Whilst it feels like Theresa could well be killed, and that's the obvious option, I'm kind of theorizing that maybe something else could have happened. What if she ended up switching loyalties and siding with the likes of Beckham McCabe? At the end of the day, she didn't owe anything to Duffy because she pretty much blackmailed her with time in jail if she didn't go there undercover. So what if they allowed her to switch sides after she told them all of the information that was shared and why it was that they were being investigated? This would definitely be a twist, and one that I would actually quite like to see. My review of the episode. I thought this was a good episode of the show. It was dripping with action, and I'm glad that it was, because that's when I feel Reacher is often at its best. We had the warehouse shootout at the start, which was tense and provided some great moments, and we also had the likes of Elliot being killed and the bodyguard being killed. I thought the moment where Reacher hit Paulie and he barely reacted, and then us seeing Paulie hit Reacher in response and Reacher dropping and being shocked at how much it hurt. It's a side to Reacher we've not really seen before, and he might have finally met his match. When Reacher said, "I just haven't worked him out yet," it showed us that he's already thinking about what Paulie's weakness could be and what his way in is, as he's never really seen anybody as big as him fight as quickly as he does. So I feel like an epic showdown is definitely on the horizon for the both of them, and I'm looking forward to seeing it unfold. When it comes to the overarching story in this season, it's definitely engaging, but I'd probably say that by this time last season, and maybe in season 1, I felt like there was a bit more going on and the stakes just felt a little bit higher. One thing that I'd say that I'm missing in this season is probably the connection that Reacher often has with a character. For example, in Season 1 it was Roscoe and Finlay, and in Season 2 it was Dixon and the rest of his team. But in this season, I'm just not really getting that same kind of strength and connection as to what he previously has done. I think it's because he's undercover and naturally just more isolated. I feel like Annette could have definitely been that, and even Richard, but we're just not seeing him with anybody. He's getting that connection over the phone, which makes it a little bit more difficult. How foolish was it of Elliot to let his guard down? I get that he thought that he could trust him, but just like how he wasn't equipped enough for the last case, he let his guard down again, and his mistake ultimately ended up landing him a one-way trip to the pearly gates. I thought he'd have some kind of redemption from his previous case, but I guess it just wasn't meant to be. There's been a lot of focus on Billy and the fact that he's old, he's on the cusp of retiring, and he's only doing this because he cares about Duffy. All of this focus is making me think that he's going to die whilst in the line of duty and he's not going to make it to retirement. Ultimately showing that the case that Duffy feels so desperate to crack and the aim of rescuing Theresa is going to cost her the people that she cares about and also her job. I'm definitely enjoying this season so far, but I'd say as we've now passed the halfway point, the pace is probably going to increase even more and the action is only going to get greater. So, bring it on. So, there you have it. Reacher Season 3 Episode 5, Ending Explained. If you want to see more videos on Reacher Season 3, then click on the card in the top corner. There'll be a playlist there. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. What did you think of this episode? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for tuning in to this week's breakdown on Reacher, and I'll see you in the next one.